You might need MIDI if you ever hairsprayed your bangs into a waterfall, layered slouch socks, tied a scrunchie to the bottom corner of your t-shirt, or tried to go for a run with a CD player. If this took you down memory lane, you might need MIDI. Perimenopause can start 10 years before you actually go through menopause. So for some women, that can be as early as 35. Nobody ever told you that? Well, nobody told us either. That's why we built MIDI. If you're experiencing symptoms like night sweats, weight gain, or just generally don't feel like yourself anymore, you may be in perimenopause. But here's some good news. With the right care, these symptoms are treatable. Book a virtual visit with a menopause specialist at MIDI. Visit joinmidi.com to schedule with an expert who gets it. Specialist-led care, virtual visits, insurance eligible. Midlife needs MIDI. Results may vary. Medications prescribed only if clinically appropriate based on a consultation with a clinician. Insurance coverage varies. Check with your plan for coverage.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we take a listen to an older episode and give you some behind-the-scenes commentary. Now, this episode we're about to cover, someone recently mentioned it in my YouTube comments. Padmoose said they wanted me to re-listen to this episode, and I go, oh yeah, that'll be dope. Right? You're like, Jason, you don't sound too excited about it. Well, let's just put it this way. I'm going to give some interesting, I don't know if it's interesting, but I'm going to give some behind-the-scenes stuff on this. But if you're a fan of this episode, like Padmoose, get ready for me to kind of rake it over the coals. Because re-listening to this episode was not the funnest experience, we'll put it that way. But listen to the episode, try to be neutral. You're like, what can he say about this? I'll play the episode right now. You can join me at the end for my feedback and my insights after. This episode is 8 years old. It was episode 32. So let's go ahead and get it started. Episode 32, Grand Soy Unified Theory.
It's all food conspiracies today, culminating in the most dangerous conspiracy we've covered to date. The Grand Soy Unified Theory. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm recording this at 11. That's kind of par for the course. I'm really tired though. We had a performance tonight. I've mentioned before that I do plays here locally. If you're in the Hood River area, yeah, always come out and see you play. Hit me up, deadrabbitradio@gmail.com. We'll see what we can do. Meet up somewhere. Actually, no, scratch that, because you might kidnap me. I was walking on the street today, and a car rolled up to me. It was like, I don't really know cars that well, but it was like a solid black, I don't know, Chevrolet. It was old. It was like from the 60s or something like that. And there was this young man in the car, and he had like a bunch of tattoos on his arm. And he goes, hey, man, you need a ride? And I was like, no, I'm cool. He goes, I see you walking all the time, which I do walk all the time. And I was like, no, I'm cool. I enjoy walking. He's like, okay, have a great day. And he drove off. Now, two things struck me there. One, what a nice young man. Secondly, I never get in a car. I never get in a stranger's car ever. Now, it's possible that he saw me walking around all the time. And people have pulled over, like owners of, like local businesses. I've been walking around for years. I've had them give me rides like in inclement weather. But generally, I won't take a ride. And even the business owners, I kind of know because I patronize their business. But if the young man was being nice, hey, thank you. That's kind of how I took it. I took it that he was being nice. But he could have also been a serial killer or an agent of deep soy. They could have known I was going to record this episode tonight. And we're going to go ahead and get into the Grand Soy Unified Theory in the end. Keep you waiting. But first, we got some other interesting food-based conspiracies to kind of wrap this week up. The first one I want to cover, and this was a fairly famous video when it came out. I'm going to include the link, but most of you guys have probably seen it before. So they took an octopus or squid or something with more than two legs, and what they did was they cut its brain out or cut the top of its head off or something like that, and then they poured soy sauce on it and it starts dancing. Well, it's not dancing, but it's like jerking around. And people were up in arms saying that was cruel, and other people saying it's already dead and we're going to eat it anyways. Like, what's the problem? It's disgusting either way. Like, I don't want to see my food move around like that. I can eat bloody food, but that's pretty gross. My question, though, when I saw that video was, if I took a human and cut the top of their head off, how much soy sauce would I need to make them move around? Because technically, you could have an army of the undead. Think about how terrifying that would be. You're in the middle of Afghanistan. You're a Taliban soldier. You're watching your post. And you see a bunch of your former Klansmen herky-jerky walking across the landscape with huge bubble, like astronaut bubble things on their heads. Helmets, I guess is the word. And with huge helmets on them full of soy sauce. Hey, that actually plays into the next story. I didn't even make that connection. I'm incredibly tired. So you outfit them with backpacks of soy sauce, and it's just like pumping into this helmet. And you just see these bodies like just moving across the desert. That would terrify anybody, and it would terrify you because you would think, oh, if the U.S. military kills me, they're going to turn me into one of those abominations. Like, am I really dead if my body's moving around? I wonder, and the article goes on to say that it's an element in the soy sauce. I think it's the salt or something. That you can tell it's well researched. I did read the article. To be fair, I did read it, but that it had something to do with the way that the chemicals are interacting with the muscle ending. So could you do that to a human? And if so, has anyone done that before? I think it would be a very effective weapon of war, just because it'd be so terrifying. I'm sure the Geneva Convention wouldn't really like it that much, but they're usually buzzkills anyways. The next story, you can tell we're just moving along because I kind of want to get to this Grand Soy Unified Theory one, because I've put a lot of research into this. A lot of research. This story kind of popped up. I just thought it was interesting. It's pretty brief. It is foods that you thought were vegan that weren't. There's some interesting ones. Now, I used to be vegetarian back in the day, because I wasn't, the cruelty to animals things was like my main reason. It just got too expensive. The economy fell apart back in 2008, and all the prices went up, and I had to go back to eating meat. But, I knew back then not to, eat certain candies like Mamba, which I loved Mamba growing up. That has gelatin, which is basically horse hooves. It's bone matter. And a lot of candies have gelatin. A lot of candies have gelatin in it, so I stay away from that. Jello, obviously. But I came across some interesting ones. So, Frosted Mini Wheats also has gelatin. Apple juice has elements of fish bladder in it. And that's what gives it kind of its smoky, kind of like, makes it look like a natural cider, the brown, like, kind of the wavy stuff in it. That's fish bladder stuff. That's disgusting. Paintballs contain gelatin. This is a weird one. This is one that I didn't expect to see on this list. Tattoo ink. Most black inks are made from charcoal that's made from burning animal bones. Crazy. So if you ever see someone who's lecturing you about being vegan and how it's all health conscious, you could say, well, do you have a tattoo? I can see it. Oh yeah, I have a tattoo. You could be a jerk and say, well, there was animal bone made in that tattoo. But, I think probably the better play is to just kind of smile to yourself and know it. Because you don't know. They may end up chopping their arm off or something because they don't want any animal in them. They probably won't believe you anyways. But tell them you heard it on a podcast called Dead Rabbit Radio. And they will also subscribe and listen to me. I don't think so. But, you always could. And then they'd hear this episode and they'd hate it. Okay, just buzzing along here. Buzzing along. It's funny. Before I get started on that, though, before I forget this, I thought this was an interesting conversation. I was having a conversation with someone on the internet the other day, and they were talking about the NASA photos of Earth are photoshopped. And that's proof that NASA's lying to us. Now, it's common knowledge that, yes, the photos you see of the Earth are photoshopped. Don't worry, this is food-related, but the photos you see of the Earth are photoshopped by NASA, and they will say that. Yeah, they're photoshopped. The way that we take photos, it's a big planet. We can't just go out there and click a picture. And the thing is that he was like, well, why do they do that? Why do they do that? And I said, here's the thing. Those pictures we see of Earth are made to be posters and lithographs. They're made to be things that you sell. They're not scientific pictures. Scientists don't have photos of the Earth coming from NASA on their walls, and they sit around in their little lab coats and taking notes. That's not what they're there for. They're for consumers. When you go into a Taco Bell and you look at a picture of nachos nachos Bel Grande, and they have everything perfectly spaced out. The chips are all perfect. The beans, the meat, the cheese. I hate tomatoes, so I pretend those aren't on the picture. That set of nachos never existed. Ever existed. Someone used Photoshop to take the perfect nachos and go in and put the ridges exactly where they should be. And then put the beans in just the right smooth area, and then put on the clumpy, glistening meat, and sprinkle the cheese in perfect dimensions, and the cheese hasn't even melted yet. You can still see those strings just before it melts. And then they take that photo to a focus group, and they go, what do you think? And they go, well, it's kind of yummy, but do this, maybe add this. It doesn't mean nachos don't exist. It doesn't mean Taco Bell is then selling us hamburgers. It just means that they're trying to present their best foot forward of nachos. That's what it's for. And that's the same thing with the cabbage in the other episode, the fake cabbage in the Bel Ray Surge. That fake cabbage was made to show the perfect representation of food. We do it too, we just do it with photographs. So yes, just because there's beautiful and they do have real photos of the Earth, and it looks like a big mud ball. It looks like a big, pale blue, gross mud ball. And even then they're like, look, this picture that had to do several passes with this satellite, but it looks gross. It's not something you would want hanging on your wall. That's why those photos are photoshopped. It's not because the Earth is flat. It's not because NASA is lying to you, because they will tell you, yeah, these photos are photoshopped. That is common knowledge. If you ask them, it'll be on their websites when you look into it. So if anyone ever says, why are these clouds like copy and pasted? It's because they were lazy and it was a Friday and someone just needed to get out of there, so he just copy pasted some clouds. They're not meant to be scientific instruments. So I just wanted to get that out there before I end our food week. Grand Soy Unified Theory. How this started off is this is one of our conspiracies that came off of our conspiracy list. This was the conspiracy that I've had to do the most research on, that I was successful. Like I said, I've been trying to find sexual assault missiles for probably about half a week now. I can't find anything, so I think it's a joke. If it's not a joke, it's pretty awesome. It might be related to the gay bombs we developed, but we'll do that another time. I think most people know about the gay bombs anyways. The bombs that are supposed to turn the enemy gay. They're from the 1990s. It's totally legit. We'll cover that some other time. We'll cover wacky weapons of war. But Grand Soy Unified Theory. People go, it's just a joke. That's just a joke. I think I've found just enough information, maybe not to prove, but to suggest that it's more than a joke. So first off, what we look at, you have to break it down into certain questions. The first question is soy sentient? Now, this is something we talked about on the episode Oil and Water, with Dr. Emoto looking at glasses of water and going, you're beautiful, I love you, you're so great, and then it creates beautiful ice crystals. And if you look at the water and you go like, oh, you suck, you're terrible, I hate you so much, and you smell like spaghetti, we dismiss the water as sentient thing because it can't really be controlled. But the question is, now we're going to move it, is soy sentient? If you talk to a soybean, if you talk beautifully and you treat the plant well with great emotional energy, will the plant sprout better? Now, the idea of playing music for plants is well known. So people have said, yes, plants can respawn. The science may be a little shaky, but the theory is that plants can respond to the mood of the people around them. You treat them well, you talk to them, you play music, they grow better. So, the initial question of, is soy sentient? I'm going to say yes. But see, that led us down a deeper path, because that was only just one part of the soy conspiracy list. On the conspiracy list, there's several elements. Soy keeps popping up. The second question is soy intelligent? Now, we're going to table that for just a moment. We're going to go ahead and move on to another theory. And see, the reason why this is the Grand Soy Unified Theory is that all of these theories combine into one, like a Voltron. Deep soy. So deep soy would be similar to the deep state, which is a term that we've heard a lot since Trump became president. It's a shadow government within the main government that tries to pull the strings. And they get stymied a lot, but because they have all of these assets in the field, and all of these projects off the books. Sometimes they think that they can run the government, and maybe sometimes they do. Maybe like during the Reagan administration, you had elements running Iran-Contra and stuff like that. That would be considered deep state. So what's deep soy? How does that play into it? Well, deep soy is a step away from the plant itself, and that's where we have companies like Monsanto genetically modifying soybeans, because soybeans are one of the, I probably should have started with this, but soybeans are one of the most valuable crop on the planet. Now, yes, wheat is the most, wheat's growing on every continent except Antarctica. It's been the oldest plant that we've grown. We grow it all the time, but soybeans, it started off about, and they really don't know, but about 5000 BC in Asia. And it's funny because they can actually trace the soybean. I know so much about soybeans now. It's all useless information after this podcast is recorded. They can trace soybeans in America to an actual person. What happened was there was a Japanese sailor whose boat wrecked, and he was rescued by some American sailors, and this was back in like the 1800s. And he goes, "Hey, thanks for rescuing me. Here's some soybeans." So we can trace it back, that we have their names. I don't remember them. But anyways, they'll be in the article. And then they brought the soybeans to America. They began planting them. And then George Washington Carver, who I don't know if they talk about him in school anymore. When I was in school, they always had a little segment on George Washington Carver and the peanut and all that stuff. He was actually the one who was like, man, we could use these things for oil. Like, these things would be great lubricant. And then Henry Ford actually, in every car he made, a bushel of soybeans were used to assemble that car. A lot of the plastics in that car were made of soybeans. And at one point, he actually made an entire car frame out of plastic that was generated from soybeans. Soybeans today, what we use them for is we use them as a lubricant. And we also use them as a food source for animals originally. And then we use them as food for us. Now, part of the problem is that there's mixed science on whether or not... Okay, it's not mixed science. The science is pretty conclusive that soy is relatively good for you, but there's mixed opinions on whether or not soy causes too much estrogen in people, and it causes girls to go through puberty younger, and it causes men to have health problems like cancers that are usually alleviated with a higher amount of testosterone. So deep soy comes into the fact. So after that overview, deep soy is where you have Monsanto actually trying to control the supply of soybeans. And if you can control the soybeans, you can control all of those other industries. So there's been genetically modified soybeans that have gotten loose into the wild and then begin planting and choking out the natural soybeans. There have been times where they've created a soybean and it's gone through the safety process where they're like, this soybean's totally fine, and they release it, and then scientists have discovered that there's extra DNA in these soybeans. The soybeans now have unknown DNA. They can't figure out why it's there or what it's doing or what health effects it has on humans. And Monsanto is like, oh, no, it's totally cool. It's totally cool. And the European agency that discovered this is like, it has extra DNA. How are you just waving it off and saying that's cool and putting on your sunglasses and skateboarding off to the ice cream store? Like, it's not cool that it has extra DNA. So Monsanto would be considered deep soy. Control the beans, control the world. Now, they've talked about things like weaponized soy. And that would be the equivalent of creating the soy to either germinate in areas and choke out the natural soybeans. So eventually the only beans that are out there are Monsanto beans. And you will have to buy more beans from Monsanto to keep your soybeans running, your soy farm running, soybean farm running. And then there's the theory that coins are being sprayed with soy. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous at first, but hear me out. If soy does cause trouble with the human species, and actually, like, raw soybean flour can kill you. It causes pancreatic cancer. Raw soybean flour, before it's produced, and just raw soybeans themselves, they will make humans sick. They have to be prepared, according to the research I've done. I'm going to put, dude, the amount of links I have just soybean related is ridiculous. But anyway, so I want to make sure that I'm sure that I'll have to keep updating it because I forgot this article. But so is soy being sprayed on coins? The point of that is to make sure that every man, woman, and child is getting dosed with soy to have these health effects. Now, and the thing is like soy itself may be affecting our brains, not just our body, but our brains, to make us want to consume more soy. Now, we know that there's sugar addictions, and what's crazy is that you have the addictive thing in your brain, but your body, if you eat carbs and you eat a lot of sugar, your body, in your stomach, fauna will grow that feeds only off sugar and carbs, and it's in your guts. And that sugar craving you have isn't in your brain. It's the fauna in your stomach, in your intestines, releasing chemicals into your bloodstream to make you crave sugar, because without it, if you go 48 hours with no carbs, that fauna begins to die. And like anything, if you're starving, you're going to start dialing dominoes. And dominoes comes to your house. The fauna in your gut will say, sugar, sugar, sugar. And unless you control, that's part of the keto diet, unless you can control that chemical release, and it is hard. That's why you crave that sugar. There's actually almost like an alien to your body life form in there that's making you crave that sugar. You can go 48 hours without sugar and carbs, you're totally fine. You don't crave it anymore. You don't look at a Snickers and go, oh man, I really want that. But in that initial 48-hour period, you do want that Snickers. It's crazy. So we know that sugar, you can have that craving for carbs and sugar. What if that same type of mechanism is developing in us for soy? Now, again, soy's really only been cultivated in the past 5,000 years, and we've been around for, 100,000? Longer than that. And before we could process it, we couldn't eat it. And it's only been in the Western world since about like the 1600s. So what if it is now making our bodies crave soy, so we grow more soy, so we eat more soy? And whoever is trying to weaponize soy or spray it on coins or put it into our water system, they would be part of the deep soy system. They're trying to create. You're constantly surrounded by soy. You're touching it, and then you're touching your mouth. Even if you don't think you're eating soy, you're craving more soy. You're getting soy all the time in your system, which makes you crave more soy. So you're going to buy more soy. And soy is going to be growing more. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jason, that's all genius. And that's partially true. But I know what you're also thinking. What does any of this have to do with the point you left out? Is soy intelligent? I looked into this and looked into this and looked into this. I was trying to find if soybeans released chemicals where they could talk to each other. I was trying to find if soybean roots touched so they could talk to each other. I was trying to find any sort of communication methods for soy, the soybean plants. I did learn that their roots can grow up to 4 feet deep, which is much deeper than most vegetables, and definitely much deeper than almost any other bean. I think any other bean, actually, 4 feet deep. It's like a 5th grader. And then I decided I had a little stroke of inspiration, and I thought, I did an episode a while back about a giant mushroom, a giant fungus that was so big and so old, is the largest life form on the planet, and has that mycelium underneath, and how it can use itself to communicate. It can send signals from one end of it to the other. The mycelium is made to absorb nutrients and water and create the life form, but it's basically a neural network. And I started to look that up, and I was seeing articles saying that plants can communicate through fungus. If plants have this neural network, they can communicate through fungus. And that is when I had my Pepe Sylvia moment. Now, Pepe Sylvia is a character who may or may not have existed in the world of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Technically, he did exist, we just never saw him. But he was the core of the conspiracy that Charlie was trying to figure out. Who is Pepe Sylvia? I Googled soybeans
mycelium. The soybeans are infested with it in America. Infested with it. They don't know where it came from. They don't know why it grows. And a soybean plant with the mycelium spread out underneath the ground can still produce soybeans. And it takes over entire fields, entire crops. So in that field, it can pass messages from one soybean plant to the other. They can talk. They can gain intelligence. And they can plan their maneuvers. They're sentient. We've checked that. They're intelligent. They have a neural network. There's companies and groups on the outside like Monsanto who has made it their goal to spread the soybean. And through both outside factors like greedy corporations, making sure that soybeans are in every type of food, that making sure that their genetically modified soybeans are infesting otherwise fertile lands and growing. And who knows, maybe that's part of the extra DNA. Maybe they have engineered the soybean to have the mycelium, to create the neural network so the soybeans can talk. Because maybe it's not Monsanto running the soybean farms. Maybe it's the soybean farms infesting us and making us eat more of them, making us become vegan, making us become health conscious, making us go through puberty earlier, trying to get us to a stage where we just want to eat nothing but soy. And that is how it controls us. That is the grand unified soy theory from the initial beans being picked 5,000 years ago, all the way to today, all the weird coincidences, like what are the chances of them finding a Japanese guy who happened to have a bunch of soybeans on his back, to George Washington Carver figuring out all this great stuff, to us not only using them for food, but using them in the production of automobiles and petroleum. We need the soybeans. If the soybeans disappeared, civilization would fall apart. That is the grand soy unified theory. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I hope you had a fun time learning the truth about soy. I know I did. Now, everything I said, except for maybe 3 things, was absolutely true and could be backed up with evidence. Monsanto has made soybeans when they genetically modified them. Now there's extra parts of DNA and missing parts of DNA and all of that. The history of the soybean, how it being brought to America, was just a guy with soybean on his back, so maybe he was controlled by soybean. But then the opinion jumped in. Is soy sentient? There's nothing to back that up. The only place I found that at was on a deleted Reddit post that someone quoted. The fact that mycelium is some sort of neural network that allows soybeans to plot the overthrow of the world. Mycelium can be a network that lets plants communicate, but it doesn't let them, by step evolution, become a brain-controlling being. The soybeans have been found in humans to cause absolutely no changes in the brain structure or no measurable changes in the brain structure, except for elderly Italian women, which is odd. And even then, it had something to do with their existing dementia. Monsanto trying to be deep soy. I do think I think companies do want to corner the soybean market because it is so valuable. And there's all the stuff about Henry Ford and the car and the soybeans, and that's all true. Those are all true pieces of information. But I did spend a week researching this, and what happened was I went into it and I wanted it to be real. I wanted grand soy unified theory, which is an actual term, to be real. I wanted deep soy to be real. These are some of the most requested stories that I've gotten. People want to know, because this is all on the conspiracy list. I go into this stuff, I want it to be real. And even I was like, halfway through my research, I said, I'm finding nothing. I had to start then looking at where soybeans can grow. Can they grow anywhere? No, there's very certain. I went in with the hypothesis that soy is sentient, intelligent, and it is evolving to basically take over. That was the hypothesis I went in. Did I go in believing that hypothesis? No. No, that was just the most entertaining hypothesis, and I could find no information to back up anything that I found. I could just find bits and pieces of scientific articles and history of the soybeans and cultivation and stuff like that. deadrabbitradio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. We're at Twitter at Jason O. Carpenter, and I've got a lot of Twitter support. I'm really appreciative of that. You can hit me up on Facebook at facebook.com/deadrabbitradio. I think, did I say deadrabbitradio@gmail.com? I don't remember. I'm incredibly tired. Thanks again to Ash Black for providing all of the artwork, for all of the logo artwork. That's going to be our episode for Friday. That's going to be our episode for the week. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys don't hate soy now. I'm okay on it. It's not a big deal for me. But I actually think the takeaway story of tonight, but the Grand Soy Unified Theory, was kind of a debunk. The soy helmets that we can control, we can make a zombie army. That's the terrifying story from tonight. Don't have nightmares. Come back Monday, and we'll start another week of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'll see you guys later. So, listen, here's the thing. This is actually a really popular episode of mine. And it has that issue that I think old episodes of Dead Rabbit Radio have. The topics are awesome. The Jason thing about making human soldiers into dancing squids or whatever, I don't know if I'd consider that awesome. Nowadays, I would classify that as a Jason Thinkins. The thing I like about this episode, we'll start there, is that I think I went a little too fast, but I think all the topics really rock. The idea of the squid putting soy sauce in a human's brain, nowadays I would classify that as a Jason Thinkins. Just be a short, like it was on this, maybe a 5-10 minute segment on an episode. The tattoo story is where the faults begin in this episode, and they really carry through to the Grand Soy story, and it's something that I actually had to work on to correct in later episodes. Before we move into that, though, I do want to say this. Just the other day, I was talking to my friend Sabine, and I said, hey, there's this weird time I was walking down the street, and this car drove up, and I told her the story that was told in this episode. And then maybe 2 days later, I listened to this episode, and I go, wow, what a weird coincidence. This episode is recorded in 2018. It's been 8 years since I've recorded this. Like I said when I told you the story, I go, I had never seen the car before, and I've never seen the car since. Now it's 8 years plus later, because it didn't happen the day I recorded the episode, but it was pretty recent to that. I still have never seen that car or that driver ever again in this town. I honestly think he was trying to kidnap me. Why? Who knows? But he says I totally would have forgotten about the whole thing had he not said, I drive past you all the time and I always see you walking. But that is 100% not true, because it was a really fancy classic car. It was like, and I'm not a car guy, but it was the level of, say, like a 63 Impala. That's not a fancy car. Well, it's like it was one of those cars that, like, from Happy Days or a gangster, like a gangbanger from the 80s would buy and then soup up and get the cherry red paint job on it, and it looks cherry, right? And it looks fantastic. It looks like it just rolled off the showroom. Somebody takes great pride in their vehicle. It stands out, is what I'm saying. It wasn't a 1992 Subaru hatchback. And I've never seen that car or that driver since. But he supposedly drove past me all the time and saw me walking all the time. That's a lie. He didn't. Because how have I not seen that car again? And every so often I'll look, like when I see a fancy car, drive by, I stick my thumb out, show him a little leg, seeing if I can hitch a ride. Listen, I don't want to say that this guy is some sort of maniacal serial killer or anything like that. He may have been. But a lot of times, we talked about this recently on an episode, a lot of times serial killers and terrorists and gangs and stuff like that will look for victims that are good people, right? They'll look for people who, you'd be kind of stupid too to get in a ride, but a lot of times these people will prey on good Samaritans. I mean, not all gangs do this. Actually, most gangs leave civilians alone. But if it's some sort of gang initiation, or if they're trying to kidnap you and take you back to their murder dungeon or whatever, there's a perverse pleasure a lot of these maniacs get in knowing that they're either killing a good Samaritan, someone who's the complete opposite of them, or someone who chose their own death through bad information, i.e. this guy looks friendly, I'll get in his car. There's, sometimes killers will use a fake gun to get you to do what they want, get you to tie up your wife, and then turn around as he ties you up, and then he tells you the gun was fake. Because that is part of the perverse pleasure, is letting you know that you weren't in any danger, but you are now. Because this knife isn't fake. Sometimes people will say, look, the gun was unloaded, ha ha ha, or look, this was a BB gun, you fool. It's part of the torment. So you get in the car, and then you go, yeah, I'm going to Walmart, but he keeps driving you, and he drives you out of town. I mean, what are you going to do, jump out of a moving vehicle? And then he drives you up to the woods, and, has his way with you. And the whole time he's like, you could have not gotten in the car. You chose this. You chose to get in the car. Right? So I'm glad I didn't get in the car, obviously. I'm smarter than that. But, I mean, listen, there's still a chance that maybe I just have never seen this car again and never seen him again, but he used to see me. It's just weird. It was such a weird story. And I think he was lying. It doesn't make any sense to me. But now we are here 8 years after recording this, and I still have never seen that car or that young man again. Let's talk a little bit about the episode itself. A couple things that have changed. This is kind of boring technical stuff. But one of the things that drives me nuts about these early episodes is all the breathing. Now, if you notice, like Jason, yeah, now that I think about it, do you breathe at all in the new episodes? I edited out. That's actually part of the longest part of the editing process, is me editing out all the breaths. So I kind of try to streamline it, but it takes a long time. I edit out most of the breaths. Sometimes I leave them in, especially when I'm laughing, because it can sound too abrupt if I remove me breathing. But listening to this episode was so painful because all of the... it sounds like right after the episode I'm going to hook myself up to a CPAP machine. Super irritating. I will say, though, these early episodes do sound better. The audio quality, for whatever reason, is better. And that's been my white whale. I've always been trying to chase that sound quality again. I think it sounded more natural. It sounds a little too processed now. That's a big technical story as to what happened with that. Audacity, my audio program did an update and I lost all my stuff. It's pretty annoying, honestly, but I do think the older episodes sounded better. I do think the older episodes had better topics, too. We've talked about that. It's probably the number one complaint. The number one complaint I get about the show from new listeners is that I don't take the topics seriously. I can tell someone's a new listener to the show because they'll comment something like, you're rambling too much. People who've been listening to the show since the beginning, that's baked into the process. That's the podcast that I want to make. That's the podcast that I like to listen to. I think as long as you get back on topic and the rambling is entertaining or thought-provoking in some way, it tells you something about the story or about the host, or it's entertaining. There's a lot of times I ramble now and I edit it out because it just kind of goes nowhere. So the episodes that you guys are getting with the rambles, at least those are kind of on topic, kind of. You're like, yeah, the episode you did recently about the urinary tract infection kind of came out of nowhere. But that was actually part of the story. But I can tell when someone's a new listener because they'll comment or they'll email things like, the show doesn't take the topic seriously. This guy thinks he's hilarious and he's not. Which, I can agree with that. But again, that's baked in. Or you take too long to get to the topic. I had to fast forward past this stuff because you ramble too much. Those are new listeners. That's the number one complaint I get from new listeners. The number one complaint I get from long-time listeners, and this is the first complaint's fair, but that's not the show that I want to do. I don't want to do a show that's completely on topic. I don't ramble on purpose, but I don't want to do a show that's dry. I don't want to do a show where I only state the facts. That's never been the show I've wanted to make, and that's a little foreshadowing as to how I feel about this episode. The number one complaint I get from longtime listeners, and this is a very valid complaint, and I totally understand, is your topics were better. They usually say the show used to be better back before episode 300 or before episode 200 or whatever. And when I ask them about that, because, is it the audio quality? Is it the length? No, they always have the exact same issue. And it's not that the show was better back then, it's that the topics were better back then. I'll hear people go, listen, you sound healthier, you sound more vibrant, the show is better put together, but the topics were better back then, and I 100% agree with that. The problem is there's only so many of those topics to go around. There's only one Grand Soy Unified Theory. There's only one Michigan Blue Hell. There's only one Eggless Travel. And I had to make a determination. Listen, I'm 100% happy with the show. I love doing the show. But I had to make a determination. Do I put out an episode every 3 months, like a lot of YouTubers do, and I'm not knocking them? Do I put out an episode every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever on a deep dive into a particular topic? Or do I put out a daily show? And to put out a daily show, the key to me, the show has always been, you're sitting at work and me, your buddy, comes and sits down next to you and goes, you won't believe what I read on the internet last night. That's always been, from the earliest days of the show, that's how I've envisioned the show. So when I'm still doing stories today, if it's a post that I found on the X board, or a first-person narrative I found on Reddit, or something like that, it's still that same vibe. Like, dude, this is nuts. What a weird story. This medium came to this house to cleanse a spirit, and she ended up having explosive diarrhea due to the spirit. I mean, how are you not going to share that with your work buddy while he's eating chili? But yeah, there is only one Grand Soy Unified Theory. I want to keep covering topics. I want to build the lore. I want to build out the universe. And I'm glad that I did. I understand that criticism. I understand that feedback 100%. But I can either put out less episodes a month and look for these one-of-a-kind topics, or I can tell 6 stories a week of stuff that I'm super fascinated in. And hopefully you're fascinated by them as well, or entertained by them, or you find them funny or informative or something like that. That's always, and I realized that super early on with the show. I always called those episode workhorse episodes, the episodes in between Monkeys Don't Exist and Grand Soy Unified Theory. But now I've always said these are the episodes that are the backbone of Dead Rabbit Radio. These are the episodes that allow the show to exist, and it's still stuff that I'm interested in. I don't cover stuff I'm not interested in. Sometimes I might stumble across something that I find actually really interesting, and I can't tell it in an interesting way. I won't be able to cover that either. So in this episode, Patamoose, thanks for sending this over, because this episode is a perfect example of that. I think it's a great topic. I think it is very poorly presented. I think this episode is actually quite bad. And here's why. It's not because of the breathing. First off, I will say, I particularly don't like my attitude in this episode. There's a weird smugness underlying it. It's really weird. I was listening to this episode and I go, if I heard this episode back then, I wouldn't want to listen to this podcast. This guy kind of seems like a dick. And I mean, could I point to one particular moment where I sounded smug? I can, actually. It was a joke. It was just a bad joke. And I remember when I listened to it the other day, I thought I can almost hear myself smirk. And I don't even remember the context. I wrote down the dumb joke. It was, let me grab it here. I don't remember what I was talking about, but I said something about, quote, putting on your sunglasses and skating to the ice cream store, unquote. And I was like, that's so dumb. And I sounded like there's a pause afterwards, like that I was so clever to come up with that. And I was like, what? What? Like, I think I was saying, like, someone who thinks they're so cool, they think they can just put on their sunglasses, hop on their skateboard, and go to the ice cream store. I was like, that's dumb. That's so stupid. And I sounded so proud of I came up with it on the spot. Everything I kind of come up with on the spot. There was a time where I used to write jokes as I was processing my notes, as I was typing on my notes. think of something really funny to say, and I'd put it in my notes. And every single time I did that, the joke fell so flat I had to take it out of the episode. It was awful. So I stopped doing that. And if I would think of a funny joke, I'd go, well, maybe I'll remember that by the time I record the episode. Because usually there's at least a week between writing the notes and recording the episode. I'll go, if I remember the joke, if it's funny enough and I remember it, I'll put it in the episode. But I'm done writing down jokes. Well, anyways, and there's like this pause. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating it, but it felt like there was this pause after I told such a funny joke, such a clever little thing. I can almost hear myself smirk after that. It was pretty annoying. But that's not why I don't like this episode. All I do, from the tattoo story to the Grand Soy story, the last two stories, all I'm really doing is reading off facts. Interesting facts. Stuff that I didn't know about tattoos. It wasn't just about tattoos, but it was about stuff that has a meat in it or animal byproduct, and tattoos were one of them. That was stuff I didn't know. That was stuff that I found online, and I go, whoa, this is really interesting. I want to tell my friends about that. I want to put it on the show. But all it is me saying this has that and this has that. I do think the joke is funny, and I don't even know if I meant it as a joke, because I sound so dry in this episode, but when I said don't tell a vegetarian that the tattoo has animal byproduct or he might cut his arm off, that is funny, but then I thought, I think I said, oh, don't do that. It's like, what? No, that's a funny joke. Why are you walking back from it? Anyways, but all it is me listing facts. And Grand Soy and Unified Theory is such an interesting conspiracy. Like, everything that's laid out. I even like the idea where I go, maybe soybeans weren't accidentally introduced to America. Like, what are the chances of the boat rescuing one guy who happened to have enough soybeans for people to use and plant? And it kind of brought it into this whole conspiracy. I love that. But the bulk of the episode is me saying George Washington Carver did this. Henry Ford did this. Soybeans are the number one plant. I don't remember all the exact facts now. I think the ending's tight, because the ending is where I start to build a little bit of the narrative. So I think the episode doesn't work. I think it's a lot of me just stating facts, and that is a problem with a lot of the early episodes. There's an episode called 911 Back to the Future Connection. I don't remember what the exact title is, but that's what the episode's about. That episode was really hard to record because it was just me reading off math formulas, basically, or telling you about pictures or clips of movies. Again, very fascinating conspiracy theory. All the connections between 911 and Back to the Future. And there's some legit stuff there. It's actually pretty weird. But the way I did it was not working. One thing that I've done differently now, and I know this is kind of apples and oranges because this story is not as fact-driven as Grand Soy. But recently, just this week, or last week, depending on when you're listening to this, or 2 weeks ago, I did the episode about the medium who came over and pooped on the floor while she was doing the house cleansing. And I'll tell you a little bit of behind the scenes to that. So what happened was I sat down to I forgot what the first story was on that, but I sat down to do the medium part, because nowadays, because it gets so hot, sometimes I record the episodes in 2 chunks. You're like, Jason, I can tell the volume changes. Someone's banging out there. Oh, hold on. I might have to record this in 2 parts. I actually think it's my neighbor. You know, that's the thing. Like, I'm not going to grief over it. I probably will come back to this if he keeps banging again. But the medium story. So what happened was I sat down to tell that story. I was recording it, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes after the first part. The volume does change. It does stink, and I'm sorry for that. But, you know, it gets so hot sometimes. And I started telling it, and this is how I told it. I said, whatever the names were, Monica, the daughter Daisy, and then the medium named Britta. I'm going to have to finish recording this because that guy's banging. But yeah, it's an interesting... Don't go anywhere. Where did I ended up taking a break. Where did I put my notes for this episode? Where did they go? I'm not wearing any pants. It's not out of my pocket. Where did I put those? I was just playing some Battlefield 6 while I was waiting for the banging to stop. Well, anyways, I have notes somewhere. But so this is what I don't really need my notes for this part. Recently, I did an episode about a medium who comes to cleanse a house and she ends up pooping her pants, has explosive diarrhea all over, and then she ends up seeing the entity while she's cleaning up in the bathroom. So I sat down to record that part of the episode. And this is the way I originally told it. Mom and daughter, they move into this new apartment. And the daughter thought it was really interesting, kind of creepy actually, that the downstairs apartment directly below them was never occupied the entire time they were there. And for some reason or another, that really creeped her out. And I go, yeah, that would be kind of creepy, I never thought about that before. And then I said that she started seeing the blobs and all that stuff. Told the narrative. And it wasn't working. So I stopped. And you go, well, Jason, what do you mean it's not working? That's the version you put up. No, I actually made a change. When I went to re-record it, it just wasn't working. I was stating facts. I was saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And it just wasn't entertaining. It wasn't engaging. The story itself is cool, but the way I was telling it wasn't. So I took a break. And I came back. And now the finished version starts like this. Mother, daughter, and a medium are sitting around the kitchen table. When all of a sudden, the daughter smells the worst smell she ever smelled before. And she looks over at the medium, and the medium has a look of terror on her face. Mother and daughter recently moved into this apartment, and the daughter thought this was weird. She never really thought about this before, but it really creeped her out that the apartment below them. So, in writing they call it the inciting incident, right? What's the pivotal part of that story? I don't give it away, but the climax of that story, I started with that. There's a little bit of a mystery added in there. And what happens when I told it like that, it opened the story up for me. The rest of the story felt very casual, even though I was still saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened. You as a listener, and even myself as a storyteller, knew it was building to an event, a mysterious ending. And it worked. Sometimes little changes like that you make on the back end can really help a story. Now, one thing I did not realize that I realized I did it, but I guess I didn't ever realize why I do it. This is all subconscious. Recently, we did a story about, we do this all the time, right? We did it with the conspiracy theory one. We've done it with all sorts of science-based stories. And I was just kind of doing this subconsciously. How do most of my stories that are just me talking about some scientific fact or some discovery or some survey or what have you, how do they usually start? We walk into a research laboratory. We're wearing our lab coats and we're kind of picking on the other researchers there, and then we make our way through the facility until we find what we're looking for, and then the story starts. And I never realized, I think I was doing that subconsciously because that does add a narrative thrust to what else is just facts and figures and notes. And I do that with all sorts of stories where, hey, we're going to a high school. This is a haunted high school, so everyone grab your book bags. We go in there. We see the janitor. We steal his keys. And these were things I think I was doing subconsciously because it does work. It totally works. One, what usually happens in those moments is that's when I might think of a reoccurring joke. I mean, I don't think I'm going to reoccur it through the episode, but I'll say something and I'll be like, like the episode with the survey. A young man followed me on Twitter and I found his research paper he wrote, and and again, I didn't plan this, but kind of the repetitive joke of that one was him complaining, hey, dude, this is my homework. Like, you're using my actual homework for content for your podcast. And you're like, oh, I don't agree with these. I don't agree with his assumption, or I have a different view on it. And that was kind of something funny to keep calling back to in that episode. And I didn't plan it out that way. But I kept laughing at the thought that, yeah, this guy, his only crime was following me on Twitter. So I went and I checked out his profile. And it was a really cool research paper. But, even then afterwards, after I released the episode, I go, it was his homework. Probably not the not the funnest thing to hear, because you're going to get graded twice, once by the Fluffle. And again, I think it was a great paper. I implore everyone to read it, but the other one from his teacher. So that's what I have. I have a problem with my attitude in this episode. It feels very smug and a little dry, but mostly smug. I can do dry, but I sounded like I was too cool. And I think that kind of, early on in the show, I tried to balance between skepticism and believing. Another thing that I did real early on is I was always having to say how skeptical I was about stuff or explain why I think stuff wasn't real. I kind of dropped that. Unless the point of the segment was, I think this is a fraud, or I think this is mental illness. We cover stuff like that, but I used to be vocally more skeptical. Obviously, I'm still skeptical. I stopped doing that, not because I became less skeptical. It's because it was ruining the narrative flow. Whenever I was telling the story, even if I believed it 100%, I go, wow, I think this actually happened. I would, as a defense mechanism, go, but it could all be fake. And then sometimes I would expound on that. And then I said, nah, you're doing this because you're trying to set up a defense mechanism, and you don't need a defense mechanism. You believe that this phenomenon is real. So why are you trying to give yourself wiggle room? So I stopped doing that. The Grand Soy story, the way I would have done it now is I probably would have started off with, and this is also as a storytelling hook. Again, I could still say the same facts and figures, but to me it just feels so dry. I probably would have started off with us in a soybean field. And I would have talked about how beautiful the sky is and squirrels making noises and kind of build the scene. And then I go, if you're really, really quiet, sometimes on a day when the weather is perfectly still, where the air is perfectly still would be a better way to put it, not the weather, you can hear whispering. But it's not coming from us. It's not coming from the farm workers, unless they're whispering super loud. See, that's a thing that just popped in my head. I might have referenced that again. It wasn't that funny, but it's not even coming from the plants themselves. You think the soy is sentient, you put your ear to the beans, you're rubbing them up in your earlobe, it's nothing. No, the whispers are deeper. But what they are saying is spooky or something like that. I don't know, the dark conspiracy. So there you go, right? And then I could have still told, I don't do that all the time, but it does help. But it does help stories like this, right? I'm not saying that's exactly verbatim what I would have done. But I think nowadays, if I started to record that segment, I'd be like, all I'm doing is listing facts and figures. What's the narrative hook? Maybe I would have tried to have a through line through all the facts and figures. So, and here's a good example of that. And I don't know if I pulled it off well. I'd have to re-listen to the episode. Maybe we'll do a classics about it, but I'm sure it's a mess. I might have already done a classics about it, honestly. But I did an episode, Bam Margera Afterlife, which was on the conspiracy theory iceberg. And all it was facts and figures. In this case, it wasn't like mathematical facts and figures. It was like esoteric numbers, this, that, and the other thing. This symbol means this, blah, blah, blah. It's an interesting idea. I don't remember the exact... I actually should have listened to that episode. I don't think I ever did it as a classics. I'm looking right now. Yeah, episode 133, Bam Margera Afterlife. He's from Jackass. That's where he got to start. He does his own thing now, but I had a really hard time doing that episode. I am going to re-listen to that. Whether or not I do a classics, I don't know, because sometimes I'll listen to an episode to do a classics on. I have nothing to say about it, so it's like, what would be the point? Just me going like, it's a good episode. The Bam Margera Afterlife. It says, and then we take a look at the conspiracy known as Bam Margera Afterlife. Are these just three words strung together? A hint at an Illuminati plot or something more hopeful? And what happened with this one is it was like just like, if you look at this number and you look at this and da-da-da-da-da, and it was just kind of nonsense that we tied into a conspiracy theory. I tried recording it, and it did not work. It was just me saying this. Now, and you think about it, Bam Margera Afterlife is 101 episodes after Grand Soy Unified Theory. So I learned a thing or two. I don't know if I took the right tact, but what I did was I brought in Hans Wormhat, or as we called him, what was the fake name we gave him? Hans Wormhat, and then I changed it to like Von Maggot Beanie or whatever, I don't remember. Franz is what we called it for legal reasons. And so the episode, if I remember correctly, the episode is basically me and him talking, and he's telling me something, and me going, what? Huh? What? I mean, I don't know how effective it is. It's a good example, because the way I told it wasn't working. Me just listing off all of these things about Bam Margera that I'm pulling from these threads off of X were not working, so I had to add a narration, I had to add a dialogue, I had to add some sort of through line to that. Now, I did get a complaint about that episode, and I remember it because it was an interesting complaint. Someone goes, well, who the world is Franz? So here's the thing, it was a new listener, right? And you can't ever craft a podcast strictly for new listeners, but you can make them new listener friendly. That's the reason why I don't have in-jokes that carry over. You know, the fluffle is probably as close as we come to that. I don't explain what it is. I just say, join the fluffle every once in a blue moon on the podcast. And, I mean, it means a group of rabbits. So it's basically like us, right? The fluffle. But the reason why Hans Wormhat doesn't continue, I'll bring Hans Wormhat back if there's a new conspiracy of his for me to cover. Originally, he was going to reoccur in more episodes, but this episode, I think he shows up in one other episode in this capacity, where he's the foil. He's like feeding me the information. I'm like, what? That's dumb. But it's not new listener friendly. It's super weird and distracting, honestly. Now, for longtime listeners, it's fantastic. But then when Hans Wormhat comes back because he posted something, I think it is more special. So, for example, this is some of the information I had to cover on that episode. I pulled up the export post. These are literally just sentences. Ryan Dunn, that was a young man who died during a drinking and driving accident. He was also a member of Jackass, and he was tied into, it's tragic. He was tied into this Bam Margera Afterlife theory. Ryan Dunn was killed on Route 322, which is the Skull and Bones number. You know, Illuminati, Associated Secret Society, Skull and Bones. The Jackass logo is Skull and Bones. Killed at the beginning of the summer solstice, Ryan Dunn, June 21st, which is, according to this, I haven't fact-checked any of this in a long time. June 21st is one of the Illuminati's human sacrifice nights. He was burned alive. He died around 3 a.m. Died 34 years old. 3 plus 4 is 7, which is a powerful number. 34 known other suicide deaths. I don't know what that is. That's just reading out this. Died in a Porsche 911 GT3. So we have a September 11th. Born 6/11/77. Killed 6/20/11. Difference of 34 years and 9 days, or using numerology. Here's the thing. The conspiracy theory itself is interesting. I don't remember the specifics of it, but that's very dry information. It's coincidental, and sometimes coincidences can be super interesting, like the Marty McFly 9/11 connection. But imagine if the episode was me. The original version of the episode was just me saying stuff like that. It was super boring. And so I backed off, and I go, how am I going to tell this story? I want to tell this information. I think it's interesting. So I said, let's bring Franz Wormhat in and have him give me the information, and then we go back and forth. Again, it's been years since I've listened to that episode. I don't know how effective it is, but I definitely think I was on the right path to, when I come to stories like this, or like Grand Soy Unified Theory, I can tell it better. And here's a perfect example. Again, we did that episode with that young man's research paper. what I did, it's a great paper. And he talked about all sorts of stuff that I thought was really interesting as far as political breakdowns in conspiracy theories. The general stereotype is conservatives believe in conspiracy theories more than liberals, because you start thinking of preppers, you start thinking of 9/11 truthers and all of this stuff. But that's not true. That's not true based on these surveys he was looking at. But I wanted to focus on the thing that I thought, what can I talk about that to me is the most fascinating, and that is the breakdown in education. Across 5 different surveys, people who have a higher college degree are more prone to believe the 2 most controversial conspiracy theories. 1, that the Holocaust numbers were exaggerated on purpose, and 2, school shootings are false flags by the government. Those are very controversial conspiracy theories. School shooting one got InfoWars shut down. There was a ton of other facts and figures I could have went over on that. But I go, what's the meat of this? Because I knew going in, I go, Jason, you just can't be reading off numbers. You notice in that episode, I never say who, I say who agrees with it, but I don't say who, I don't say this percentage disagreed with it, this percentage was neutral, and this percentage agreed. I really struck it down to its core essence. How many people agreed with these conspiracy theories? That's not really how you tell a survey. That's definitely not how I read a survey, and I love reading surveys like this all the time. You got to read all of it, but I focused on the most essential numbers and the fact that they were 2 to 3 times higher, the higher your level of education. Bam. There's no narrative hook. There's no through line on that, but I laser focused on such a small part of this big essay. It's not an essay. It's a research paper that I made it easy to tell, and I told the information that I really wanted to tell. And that's why in that episode I keep saying, I don't do this all the time. I said multiple times, you should read it for yourself. Go check it out yourself, because there was so much information I left on the table. So I've learned from doing episodes about things where it's just facts to get to the meat of the matter. And you go, well, you say that, you do ramble. To me, the rambling is part of the journey. That's why when people go, because that is a complaint I get from new listeners, you ramble too much. For me, I mean, then I hate to break it to you, but it's just not the podcast for you. There's a lot of really good podcasts out there that don't do that take this stuff. I feel like I take this stuff seriously, but the journey we go on may not be as serious as you want, or may not be as laser focused as you want. And that's kind of how the podcast is. That's how the podcast was from episode 1. The episode 1's nothing but rambling. So if I could here's the thing, people have asked me if I would ever cover a topic again. The short answer is no. And that has to do with my own psychology. I don't backtrack. What I mean by that, it's a weird quirk I have that people have experienced it with me in my daily life. They'll say, hey, can we run some errands? I go, yeah, sure. And they'll say, well, we'll go to Safeway. And then we got to go up to the Heights, that's part of town here, and we got to go to the pet store, and then we'll go back downtown and get some coffee, and then we'll head on up to Rosar's to get some final groceries. And I'll say, no. I mean, here's the thing. If I'm driving, I want to do everything downtown first. Even if it's not the most efficient way to do it, even though it's hard to find parking downtown, I don't backtrack. I don't like walking back places. That's why I haven't been home in months. I've just been stuck at the grocery store. I won't walk back home. I don't go back around. To me, it's a weird psychological thing. I don't backtrack. I don't walk back. If I'll get everything done in a general area, and even then, someone will go, hey, let's go to the bagel shop, and then we'll stop by the post office. I'll go, let's go to the post office first, and then go to the bagel shop, because that is a straight line. Now, again, with parking and everything like that, it may be more convenient to do the bagel shop first. And so that's the same reason why I don't go and cover old topics. I will if new information pops up, like the man from Torred. We covered it twice. Once when we covered the very famous version of the story, and then when I found this dude online goes, oh no, I'm from Japan, and that story was answered, and here's an actual newspaper that says that he was this guy who got arrested for identity theft. It's like, what? What? This has been one of those famous mystery stories for 30 years, and it was answered in a Japanese language newspaper. Return to Torred. We did that episode. It's one of the things I love about the show, right? Because I'm constantly looking for content, I never would have discovered that. You can still, people still talk about the man from Torred, and they don't have that information. It just kind of came and went, but because I was always looking for content, I just stumbled across that one day. If more information came up about this conspiracy theory, I 100% would cover it. I'd cover it next week. But would I redo the episode? Would I make it better? Would I make... No. That's just not my MO. I never even, when I was a writer, I hated doing second drafts. I did because I knew that it was essential and you would see those kinks and it hadn't been created yet. And I'll do second drafts on episodes. I'll start recording an episode and be like, this doesn't work. And I'll start it over. I do that less and less because I think I've gotten better at... Now I can be 10 minutes into telling a story and say this isn't working. Whereas opposed to a year ago, I would record a whole episode and then throw it away because it sucked. And have to do a whole new episode from scratch. And I usually when that happens, I would mention it. I'd be like, hey, but not all the time. Sometimes I just release the episode and nobody knew. Unless they were someone who knew me, they go, hey, you want to hang out tonight? I go, no, I got to re-record an entire episode because it sucked. Now I can be about 10 minutes into recording an episode or a segment and go, this sucks. This is not any good at all. The story's not going to work. I remember I didn't do the story, but I recorded probably about 20, 30 minutes about a piece of the True Cross being on a Russian flagship, a Russian battleship that was sunk really early into the Ukraine war. And we don't know if they were able to retrieve. This was in there. I mean, it was a flagship, right? So they had a church in the ship. They had like a chaplain place in the ship. And, I mean, it was the best boat that they had, and they had a piece of the True Cross in there, and it sank, and we don't know if the piece of the True Cross was recovered. Like, did someone grab it on the way out? Because the boat is now at the bottom of the Black Sea. It's a super interesting story, but I could not tell it in a super interesting way. The way I told it was really boring. And then it turns out that you can have a piece of the True Cross, but it's not actually a piece of the cross that came off the cross of Calvary. There's this, I could be using the term wrong, but like transmutation or something, where if back in 800 AD, that's too far back in 1200 AD, if I had a piece of the True Cross, the actual sliver from the cross Jesus was crucified on, and I touched that to a 2x4, now that entire 2x4 is classified as part of the True Cross. And that 2x4 could be cut into splinters and then given to priests and parishes around the globe. And it's interesting. Like, all that stuff is stuff that I just found out. It was really interesting. I was telling the story maybe a week or two after the battleship went down. I couldn't find an interesting way to tell. You see how succinct that was, right? I could tell it like that. I could tell it in 2 to 3 minutes. Fascinating. I'll put an article in the show note if you want to read more. But I couldn't do it any more than that. And doing a show like this, I could tell 2 or 3 minute long stories, but to be honest with this episode, the first segment about the squid, the only reason I really remember the squid story is because that was such a shocking image to me, the dancing squid with its head cut open. To this day, that's still kind of a grisly idea. I tell that story so quickly, I honestly had to look at the show, like I had to pull up the episode online, because I forgot what I talked about. I totally didn't remember the first story, and I didn't remember the second story either. When I looked at the notes on the website, I go, oh, okay, yeah, I do remember, because I just listened to the episode a couple days ago, I do remember talking about the vegetarian thing, but I completely forgot about it. I went too quick last time. A lot of early episodes, I feel like if you blinked and you missed it, if you were walking or doing homework or washing your dishes, you could completely miss a story because I'm talking so fast, I'm editing it and all that stuff. But anyway, so I mean, it's funny because the behind the scenes on this episode is longer than the episode itself. But Padmoose, this was an interesting episode. Like, again, I think the topic's great. I think the presentation's really bad, but this was a good episode to kind of look at, to do a classics on, so I appreciate that. A lot of people have recommended classics over the years. Generally, I'll say this, the closer you recommend them to the end of the season, the more likely I'll cover them. Because if you recommend it in the middle of the season, I'll probably forget. But a lot of times I'll listen to an episode and it won't be so great or so bad that I really have anything to say about it. But I do appreciate getting the opportunity to re-listen to this one, because it definitely is a time capsule. No vehicles. Right, there's no vehicles back then. That came, I think, closer to episode 50. I think we're still a couple episodes away from the Carpenter Copter making its first appearance. And then the vehicles really took hold probably post episode 100. And then when the Patreon started, it became a necessity. We started using the vehicles every episode after that. Fascinating, though, listening to such an old thing. So that is our classics episode for today. We're going to be doing some more. What are the other? I have two more coming up for this week. Like, yeah, there was an episode I was going to do, and it just wasn't that good, and it wasn't that bad. I thought it would be. Yeah, we got another one about, I'm not going to tell you what it is because it'll spoil it, but I thought I had three more. Whatever. I did find my notes as we were talking, but yeah, this is a good episode to listen back to, because I think I had a lot to say about it. Okay, guys, you have a great day, and I will have another classics for you shortly. Bye-bye. That's my new catchphrase. I'm getting rid of all the other ones. It's just me going, bye-bye. Have a good one, guys.